I never thought a repair shop could feel like a stage. Maybe it was the fluorescent lights flickering just enough to make the dust in the air visible, or the faint hum of the compressor that seemed to underscore every movement I made. But that night, when she walked in, everything else blurred. She was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, hair slightly mussed as if she'd run her hands through it a dozen times already. Mid-40s, confident, that kind of calm authority that made people either respect her or feel exposed without realizing why. I knew her as my mentor, my guide through certifications, messy paperwork, and the endless troubleshooting that I'd never fully grasped. She always had this knack for showing up exactly when you needed help, or when you didn't even know you needed it. "Hey," I said, voice too high, probably, trying to sound casual as I handed her the wrench she'd left on the workbench. She smiled, a small, fleeting curve of her lips, but it wasn't the smile you give someone out of politeness. It was something heavier, layered, like she'd recognized something in me I didn't yet see myself. There was a pause, the kind of pause that doesn't feel empty but charged, humming with possibility. I wanted to step back, give her space, but instead my hands lingered on the tool just a second too long. Her fingers brushed mine, almost incidentally, but I caught the electricity before I could shake it off. "I was hoping you'd be here," she said quietly. Not loud, not playful, just matter of fact. And somehow, those words hit me harder than anything she'd ever explained in a lecture or demonstrated over an engine. There was curiosity in her eyes, a softness that almost contradicted the strength she radiated. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but the words stuck in my throat. I watched her lean over the counter, examining a schematic I hadn't noticed she'd brought. Her brow furrowed slightly, lips pressed together in that way I'd memorized without realizing it. I wanted to reach over, point something out, help, but I hesitated. Because something about the way she was looking at me, not the diagram, had stopped me entirely. Time slowed. I counted 3 heartbeats, maybe 5. She straightened, and the faintest laugh escaped her lips. It wasn't for anyone else, just the moment, maybe even at herself. She tilted her head, her gaze flicking toward mine, and I felt a strange, disarming pull. That tilt, that glance, the way she seemed to notice me noticing her. She didn't say anything else, but she reached out, lightly, almost brushing my hands as she rearranged the papers on the counter. That touch lingered far longer in my mind than it had in reality. It wasn't bold, it wasn't explicit, but it was enough. Enough to make my fingers tingle, enough to make me wonder if she realized the chaos she could provoke in me with something so small. I closed my eyes for just a moment, trying to breathe through it, and when I opened them, she was gone. Just like that, she'd slipped out of the room, leaving a faint scent of her perfume and a memory that pressed against my chest. And yet, even now, I can't stop thinking about how her hands felt when they brushed mine, and the way she said nothing but made the air between us feel impossible to ignore. The next time she appeared, it was early morning, the shop still smelling of oil and metal, sunlight streaking through the blinds like golden bars. I was kneeling over a carburetor, gloves greasy, when she walked in, quiet as if she hadn't wanted to announce herself. She carried a clipboard, shoulders slightly hunched, and there was a kind of weariness around her that I hadn't noticed before. "Morning," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. My voice sounded louder than usual in the empty shop. She nodded, eyes scanning the cluttered workspace, and for a moment she didn't speak at all. We started working together in silence, her hands precise as she adjusted a piece of machinery, mine hovering nearby, ready to assist, but careful not to crowd her. I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers when she reached for a bolt. A habit? Fatigue? Maybe both. She didn't complain, didn't mention the long hours she must have worked, but the tension in her shoulders, the subtle dip of her chin, spoke volumes. "Pass me the wrench," she said finally, voice clipped. But when I handed it over, she didn't immediately take it, and our fingers brushed. Not the accidental touch from before. This one lingered, just enough to make my chest tighten. She pulled back quickly, as if embarrassed, and focused on the task again. There were moments I caught her exhaling softly, closing her eyes briefly when a piece resisted or a bolt refused to fit. She tried to hide it, tried to keep her composure, but I saw the edges of vulnerability she couldn't quite mask. And somehow, that made her more real, more human than I'd ever allowed myself to think. I watched the way she laughed at something small, a sarcastic comment from a passing coworker, and it was like a shuttered window had cracked open. Her laugh was quiet, controlled, but it had warmth, and I couldn't stop my eyes from following the curve of her lips, the subtle arch of her brows when she smiled. By mid-morning, we were leaning over the same engine, her shoulder brushing mine, a faint scent of coffee clinging to her hair. I wanted to ask if she was okay, to say something that might ease the tension I could feel radiating off her, but the words lodged in my throat. She seemed distant, yet inviting all at once. It was impossible to reconcile, and I was painfully aware of how much I wanted to. Then, for a fleeting second, she looked at me. Really looked. Her eyes softened, and she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, a simple, human gesture that made my pulse spike. There was an unspoken question there, an invisible thread pulling me closer, and I felt the weight of the moment like it had its own gravity. She cleared her throat, turned back to the engine, and the spell broke. But the pull lingered. My hands hovered over the tools, my chest tight, mind replaying the glance, the laugh, the slight tremor in her fingers. And just before she finally left, she rested her hand on the counter, letting it linger near mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. It was nothing, just a pause, but I carried it with me the rest of the day, like a quiet promise I wasn't sure I was ready to understand. If you want, I can move on to part 3, where the tension deepens and it was late, the shop nearly empty, the rain tapping against the windows in uneven bursts. The kind of rain that makes the air smell of wet asphalt and something metallic, the sound filling spaces where conversation normally lives. I was organizing tools when she appeared at the doorway, coat dripping, hair sticking slightly to her forehead. "Couldn't sleep," she said softly, shrugging out of the wet jacket. I nodded, unsure whether to ask more or just let her move past me. She perched on the edge of the workbench, pulling her knees up slightly, and I noticed how small she looked like that, even though she radiated that same quiet authority I'd been memorizing since the first day I met her. We worked side by side on a complicated engine repair, hands brushing occasionally, each touch fleeting but heavy with meaning. I kept my voice low, careful, trying not to betray the tension tightening in my chest. She didn't speak much either, but I could hear her inhale differently, watch her fingers linger over the tools a beat too long. A sudden buzz from her phone broke the silence. I caught the name flashing across the screen and quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. She glanced at it, a flicker of something, hesitation, annoyance, maybe guilt, crossing her face before she silenced it without answering. External interference, invisible but sharp, reminding me how impossible proximity could be. "Need a hand?" I asked, keeping it neutral, letting my fingers hover near hers on the same component. Her eyes met mine for a second longer than necessary, and I felt the pull, that strange gravity between us. She nodded slightly, not speaking, and in that moment, everything I wanted to say tangled with everything I knew I couldn't. The room smelled faintly of oil and wet clothes, and the rain made a rhythm that seemed to echo the pulse in my ears. She leaned just enough to brush against my shoulder as she adjusted a bolt, her warmth seeping through my jacket. My hands froze mid-action. One breath, and the world could tilt, and yet I didn't move. She hummed softly, a sound I hadn't noticed before, almost like a secret melody only I was allowed to hear. I wanted to reach out, to lean closer, to speak the words I'd been carrying for weeks, but the hum drowned me, wrapped me, held me in that impossible space where desire and restraint collided. Lightning flashed outside, briefly illuminating her face, the curve of her jaw, the slight furrow in her brow, the softness I wasn't supposed to see. My throat tightened. She looked at me again, almost as if she wanted to say something, and I could feel the moment stretching, fragile, unsustainable. And then the shop door banged open, a coworker dripping rainwater across the floor, breaking the spell. She straightened immediately, tucking herself back into that controlled, confident shell. My hands fell to my sides, chest heavy, mind replaying the glance, the hum, the shoulder brush, everything that almost became more than it was. I watched her move toward the coat rack, fleetingly, her presence still lingering in the space between us. And in that suspended silence, I realized, one small motion, one word, and everything could have changed. But it didn't, at least, not yet. We were sitting across from each other at the small break table, the shop closed, only the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the space. I'd been avoiding her eyes for the last 10 minutes, pretending to flip through a manual I didn't really need, while she stirred her coffee absent-mindedly. Steam rose and twisted between us like invisible words neither of us could say. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was low, almost cautious. "Do you ever wonder why we're doing this?" She didn't elaborate, just let the words hang, heavy, unfinished. My stomach dropped. Was she asking about the engine? The work? Or us? I swallowed, trying to keep my voice even. I don't know. Sometimes it feels like we're just circling around things we're not supposed to touch. The words sounded clumsy even in my head, but I couldn't stop them. I dared a glance at her. Her eyes were wide, unguarded, and I caught a flash of something I hadn't seen before, uncertainty, maybe fear. She set her mug down with a soft clink. I can't pretend anymore that this isn't different, that it's just mentoring or work or whatever we tell ourselves it is. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the edge of the table. I noticed the faint scar along her knuckle, the way she rubbed it absent-mindedly, and it felt intimate, almost painfully so. We didn't speak for a long time after that. Just sat there, breaths mingling with the faint smell of coffee and oil. I watched her, memorizing the curve of her jaw, the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted away when they caught mine for too long. And I realized I'd been holding my own breath, waiting for her to look back. "You're young," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "And I shouldn't be." She stopped, licked her lips, paused. The unfinished thought hit harder than any accusation. I knew exactly what she meant, and yet I couldn't find words to comfort her or myself. I leaned back slightly, trying to create space, but it felt like there was none. I don't know how to do this either," I admitted. A simple, clumsy truth. And somehow it made everything worse. Her gaze dropped to the floor, then back at me, and in that long stare, I could see the collision of control and longing, certainty and confusion. She wanted to say more, I knew, but the words wouldn't come. Neither would mine. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. Each second pressed on us, louder than any voice could. And then, almost too quietly to hear, she said it. "What if I'm the only one keeping us from falling apart?" It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a question, really. It was everything. A vulnerability I wasn't supposed to see. And in that moment, I realized how impossible this was, how much closer we could be, and how much danger lingered in that closeness. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to take her hand, steady her, tell her it would be okay. But I didn't. I couldn't. And as I watched her shoulders slump, the fight draining from her posture, I understood something terrifying. Some silences are louder than any touch, and this one might break us both. It started with a photo she found tucked in the corner of a toolbox, edges curled and faded from years of handling. I didn't mean to look, but the moment her hands hovered over it, I caught a glimpse. A younger version of her, laughing, arms wrapped around someone whose absence filled the air between us like invisible smoke. She didn't speak at first, just traced the edges with her fingertip, eyes distant. The quiet was thick, almost unbearable, as if the shop itself had gone still. He died 10 years ago," she said finally, voice low, almost apologetic, as though she had to justify the sudden fragility that overcame her. I nodded, unsure what to say. Words felt heavy, too loud for the tiny crack in her armor I was watching. Instead, I leaned on the counter, hands folded, pretending to be busy with the tools in front of me, but my eyes never left her. "Sometimes," she continued, not looking at me, "I wonder if I loved him enough, or if I just loved the idea of him." Her voice cracked on the last word, a quiet confession that made the room shrink around us. I wanted to reach out, wanted to tell her she had, in some small way, loved perfectly. But I stayed silent. Because the truth was, I didn't know how to fix her, and I didn't know if I should try. I remembered the way she'd flinched at that phone call a few nights ago, the hesitation in her laugh, the way her hands had trembled over the engine bolts. All of it made sense now, painted in the subtle shades of loss and memory. I felt a pang of something I couldn't name, protectiveness, longing, guilt, curl through me, twisting my chest. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked softly, barely above a whisper. She glanced at me then, eyes glistening, lips pressed together. I could see the weight of decades in that one look, the mix of shame and pride, grief and stubbornness. I regret a lot, she admitted, finally meeting my gaze. But not him. Never him. I just regret the space I left for myself after he was gone. Her hands folded over the photo, fingers tightening slightly, and I felt that quiet earthquake inside me. The one that doesn't announce itself but shifts everything beneath the surface. We stayed like that for a while, the silence stretching, punctuated only by the rain outside and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. I wanted to say something, to bridge the gap between past and present, but every word felt like an intrusion into her moment, into the sacred fracture of memory she had allowed me to witness. And then, as she set the photo down, her hand lingering a beat too long near mine, she looked up and whispered, almost to herself, "I didn't think anyone would ever see this side of me again." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The weight of that confession pressed into my chest and left me shaking in a way no storm outside could match. It wasn't a declaration, not a promise, but it changed everything. Somehow, in the quietest way, it made the air between us impossibly charged. We didn't speak for a long time, just sat on the low bench in the corner of the shop, the tools scattered around us, the rain outside fading to a soft drizzle. She didn't need to say anything. The quiet said enough. I could feel her presence like heat against my shoulder, and for the first time, I stopped questioning what we were doing or who we were supposed to be. Her hand moved slightly, brushing against mine as she reached for a rag. Neither of us pulled away. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sudden, it was just right. A small touch that carried years of unspoken tension, of hesitation, of wondering what could have been and what shouldn't. "I don't know if we can ever go back to before," she said finally, voice low, almost vulnerable. Her eyes didn't leave the workbench, but I felt the weight of the words in my chest. I nodded. I understood. And I didn't need to argue, didn't need to say I'd wanted this the entire time. The air between us shifted, subtle and real, like the gentle tilt of sunlight through the blinds. I noticed the faint line of wear on her knuckles, the curve of her neck as she leaned forward, the softness around her eyes that had only appeared in moments of unguarded honesty. I wanted to memorize it all, but more than that, I wanted to stay here, in this fragile, earned peace. "You're different than I expected," she murmured, almost to herself, fingers lingering over a tool I'd been holding for her. I didn't respond with words. I didn't have to. My hand nudged hers slightly, not enough to startle her, just enough to bridge the space that had always felt impossible to cross. We stayed like that, side by side, letting the silence carry us instead of forcing conversation. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a storybook ending, but it was ours, tentative, human, layered. Every glance, every shared breath, every small, hesitant gesture told more than declarations ever could. At one point, she leaned just slightly, brushing her forehead against my temple as if testing a fragile boundary. I closed my eyes, letting the sensation settle over me. It wasn't a leap into fantasy. It was acknowledgement, acceptance, the quiet surrender to something that had been building for months. The tools around us, the smell of oil, the faint hum of lights, all of it became background noise. I realized I didn't need words, didn't need explanations, didn't need promises. I only needed this. The weight of her hand near mine, the brush of her presence, the knowledge that we were here together, fully seen and fully aware of the risks. When she finally pulled back, her eyes met mine, and I felt the calm certainty in that glance. The truth neither of us would say aloud, but both understood. We were in it, entirely, and we had arrived here through the messy, flawed, beautiful human chaos that had brought us together. I exhaled slowly, letting it go, letting it stay. And for the first time in months, the shop didn't feel like a place of tension or possibility. It felt like home. Looking back now, I can see how much that night, those months, really changed everything. Not in sweeping, obvious ways, but in the quiet, nearly invisible shifts that stick with you long after the moment has passed. I learned how close you could get to someone without speaking, how presence alone could speak louder than words. She changed too, though I think she would never admit it. I see it in the way she laughs a little softer now, allows herself to linger in moments instead of fleeing to control, and in the faint, almost imperceptible ease she carries when she's around me. There's a weight lifted, a thread of past grief loosened, and I like to think it's because of what we shared. Not perfection, not fairy tales, just real, flawed, human connection. I changed, too. I learned patience, restraint, how to feel something deeply without demanding it be returned exactly the way I imagined. I learned that desire doesn't always need fulfillment to be meaningful, that the longing, the stolen glances, the brushed hands, all of it can shape you, guide you, teach you. Love, I think, isn't always fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it's the way someone stays beside you in the quiet aftermath of a storm. Sometimes it's the unspoken agreement that your lives have touched in a way nothing can undo, and that's enough. I remember her hands on the tools, brushing mine, her head tilting toward mine, her laugh soft and knowing. Those small, fleeting details became landmarks in my memory, reminders of something extraordinary in the ordinary. Every time I close my eyes, I can feel that moment of shared understanding, that fragile intimacy, like it happened yesterday. It's funny how life moves on, yet some things don't leave you. Some moments echo forever, teaching you about vulnerability, courage, and the strange, unnameable gravity that draws people together. I carry it all with me, not as regret, not as longing, but as a quiet, steady warmth that reminds me how alive we are when we allow ourselves to feel. And even now, when I walk past a tool bench or hear the soft hum of machinery, I catch myself thinking of her, of us, of everything that started with a spark, lingered in a glance, and found its way into something quietly profound. We didn't need declarations. We didn't need perfect timing. We just needed the courage to be present, to be human, and to hold on to each other in the spaces that truly mattered. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?